Good morning, everyone. My name is Liz Cedillo Pereira, and I serve as the Chief of Equity and Inclusion for the City of Dallas. And on behalf of the City Manager and the City, I'd like to welcome you to the third annual Equity Indicator Symposium, hosted by the City of Dallas and the Communities Foundation of Texas. English and Spanish interpretation are available. You may select the Spanish closed captions, abbreviated CC, on the screen for those who wish to see the Spanish translation of today's events. We are thrilled to virtually hold the space with you and connect with our community, our partners, our stakeholders, and leaders with the common goal of creating an equitable Dallas. As we open this space together, I would like to first acknowledge our predecessors, the indigenous people, our native people who lived in a place called Texas, from the Native American language Caddo, which means today, of course, Texas. This week is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Week, and Tuesday is January 18th, is the National Day of Racial Healing. This is a time to contemplate our shared values and bring the community together to inspire collective action and the pursuit of a more just and equitable world. What better time to hold our Equity Indicators Symposium each year, which is always personally a gratifying and productive gathering for fellow Dallasites of all walks of life. In the spirit of collective action, the theme for this year's symposium is the city and community, collaborating to advance equity through measurements and accountability. And I see we have reached our 204 mark of participants. So we're really glad that every one of you are here today to hear our vision for what equity looks like, to hear your vision. As you may know, the Dallas City Council has the audacious goal of making Dallas the most equitable city in the nation. Who among us here believes that that can be true, that can happen? In March 2021, the Dallas City Council unanimously approved the Racial Equity Resolution, which reaffirmed the city's commitment to advancing racial and ethnic equity and called for the development of a racial equity plan. So building on our equity efforts to date, the Racial Equity Plan will serve as a strategic framework for embedding equitable principles and practices in all that we do across the city. And you are a major part of that process. It will be a living document that shows how city departments will close racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic disparities that have historically impacted our communities of color and lower income neighborhoods. The Racial Equity Plan will not be possible without our community partners, stakeholders, and leaders. Your input and voice are critically important to shaping the plan so that it accurately reflects our city's past, present, and our collective future. In our office, we often say that equity is everyone's work. By centering our community's voice, we are striving to put principles in action to achieve a collective vision for racial and ethnic equity in Dallas. This work will not be done overnight, and it takes each one of us doing our own small part. I look forward to your continued engagement, your guidance, your contributions to this planning process as we seek to finalize the plan this year and present to the City Council. To speak to the theme of community collaboration, we are excited, gratified to bring in many community leaders into the space and partners to the symposium today. And I want to thank our co-host, Communities Foundation of Texas. Specifically, Sarah Cotton Nelson has been with us from the very beginning of this work. And we're glad she's here today and very saddened by the fact that she will be going on to new endeavors, but excited about what the future holds for Sarah. And our speakers representing many organizations, including the Dallas City Council, Every Texan, our partner in the development of the Equity Indicators report, Cospero Consulting, our lead partner in the development of the Racial Equity Plan, Dallas Independent School District, Paul Quinn College, Dallas College Board of Trustees, Friendship West Baptist Church, Dallas County Promise, the Dallas Regional Chamber, and more. Thank you again for being here today and for your commitment to Dallas and to our residents. We hope you enjoy the symposium, and I look forward to continuing this work with you. I'll now pass it over to Eva de la Luna Castro with Every Texan for her opening remarks. Thank you, Eva.
I'll try again. Thank you, Chief Liz, and thank you all for being here today. I'll just make some brief remarks about Every Texan for those who are not familiar with us. We are a research and policy advocacy organization based here in Austin, and we were formerly known as the Center for Public Policy Priorities. I've been here 23 years, and our advocacy is mainly at the legislative level. We've done many reports over the years. What is different and critically important about the equity indicators. This is our third update that we've done for the city of Dallas. The research was done by a colleague of mine who's no longer here, but the third indicator is focusing on what COVID-19 has done to our communities, and that I think is where the research and the findings are helping us understand, again, seeing this as a continuation of the first two reports. What is it that the city is doing in response to the additional challenges that COVID-19 and the winter storm have presented communities within neighborhoods? The third update of the equity indicators is on the City of Dallas's website. Let's see if the link has been dropped in the chat. And it is a pretty extensive report. It only focuses on 13 of the indicators that were presented in previous reports. Previous reports had 60. So this is focusing again on the key areas that have been affected by the pandemic. Businesses, what's happening to businesses, and then the important thing that we have in an accompanying narrative is what has the city done in response. A small business continuity fund and microgrants. What is happening in unemployment, in working poverty? What is happening in evictions? That's an example of evictions of where data issues have presented themselves because of the pandemic. Previous reports mentioned eviction rates. Now we're using eviction filings, which is slightly different. Another key area, which unfortunately too many of us are aware of, is what is happening to the cost of housing. How many households have more than 30% of their income going to housing, and what is the inequity is that's getting worse, unfortunately. Access to internet is one area where we are seeing improvements, thankfully. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, internet access has become more important than ever to ensure that our children have access to public education, to ensure that Dallas residents and people statewide have access to healthcare, telemedicine. So again, we were encouraged to see initiatives like the digital navigators that the city has created. Another area back in the housing category, again, this research turned up not just that challenges have been worsened, but that the city's effort is focusing resources on families and households that need it the most. Another example there, the Dallas water utilities, coming up with ways to help families affected by the high use and water problems last February. So again, the research and the link will show you more area by area, what is worsening because of the pandemic, what is getting better, and what remains to be done. What can the city do through public policy to direct resources where it's needed the most? I will be kind of sitting in on a lot of the sessions today. I don't have enough time here to discuss the findings in more detail. I will provide my email for those of you who look at the report that is online. and have questions about it. The methodology has not really changed much, but you may look at it if you're not familiar with it and not be quite sure how this compares to our previous reports. But the kind of the big picture is the scores can be from 1 to 100. The higher the score, the more equitable outcomes are between the highest ranking ethnic group and the lowest ranking. And those can change depending on the indicator. But again, a really high score means more equity and that things the gap is reducing. A lower score means that is where equity is worsening. And one final thing I'll say again, for those not familiar with the research, is that equity itself isn't enough. The first report that we did found that in adults who were smoking, that was something where equity existed. Unfortunately, it meant that too many people in Dallas were smoking. So just because you have a high score doesn't mean that you have a good public health outcome. Like I said, there's a lot of research here. It was done by a colleague of mine, but I will do my best to help anybody wanting to know more about the details. But the big takeaway here is major challenges presented by COVID-19. And the good news again is that the city has been extremely responsive and is not just measuring the challenges. Again, I've been at a think tank where we do a lot of reports that measure the policy challenges that exist. The key here is the collaboration that we've heard about, thanks to the support of the Rockefeller Foundation, the Communities Foundation of Texas, city individuals, faith-based organizations, everybody that Chief Liz mentioned, but especially the city staff and city officials. The collaboration, again, in directing resources to where it's needed most is what's important. And again, I'll be around throughout the day, but I will provide my email here for those of you with more specific questions about what this report identified as the key challenges and where we can go from here. So thank you.
Thank you, Eva, and thank you to every Texan for being our data equity partner. We could not do this work without you. The equity indicators serve as a barometer for how well we're doing or how much more we need to do to address disparities. So we're alongside every Texan, as well as the Community Foundation, since we started our Office of Equity and Inclusion. And it's my honor today to introduce our moderator of the Policymaker Roundtable discussion, which I'm very excited about, Sarah Cotton Nelson. Sarah is the outgoing Chief Philanthropy Officer of the Communities Foundation of Texas. Throughout her time with the foundation, you may have seen her and her work. She's led efforts to advance CFT's policies and procedures to ensure a more racially, geographically, and culturally inclusive, equitable grant-making process and community responsive nonprofit capacity building. We just couldn't have done it without them during the pandemic. She has a unique ability to connect people to data, to catalyze community members to engage in issues which take a village to solve, and is a recognized social innovator and leader in Dallas. So Sarah, thank you for being my partner in this work, and thank you for being with us today. I'm handing it over to you.
Liz, it is ever and always a joy to get to partner with you on this work and with those that I will be hosting on this panel, because the work takes every single one of us. And so if you out there listening to this panel today have not yet joined in the fight for equity across our community, I invite you to do so, because every single person's efforts are needed in this area. I am a little sad that in 2022, we are still meeting by Zoom. 3 years ago, we were all together at Paul Quinn College, and I had high hopes we would be all together again. But welcome back for year 2 to my humble home from where I am Zooming to you with my backdrop as our winter landscape across White Rock Lake for the storm last year, which is a reminder to me that we can endure many things and come through as a community. That certainly was, in a much more macro sense, what Martin Luther King Jr. Knew in his bones and in his heart as he worked for civil rights and against segregation. And this Equity Indicator Symposium is really built right around the celebration of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and his work. And I'd like to open this session with 2 quotes from him and end the session with 2 quotes from him as well, because the truth of his words and the power of their call, I believe, are so strong for each of us. And I hope that everyone picks up the mantle of this truth and pushes forward toward change together. The first thing that he said in his letter from the Birmingham, Alabama jail in 1963 is that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And that is so true. We'll be talking about that today. The second is, and this was from a Christmas sermon of his from 1967. He was talking globally about peace on earth, as we often do around the holiday season. And I think where he says peace on earth, I really can substitute equity in the community, because that is a form of peace in itself. And he says, if we are to have peace on earth, or as I would say, if we are to have equity in our community, our loyalties must become ecumenical rather than sectional. Our loyalties must transcend our race, our tribe, our class, and our nation. And this means we must develop a world perspective. And for us here, our world perspective today is really centered on this community. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the 3 honorable guests that we have on this panel today, beginning with Council Member Casey Thomas, who is in his last term. He was the original chair of the Workforce Education and Equity Committee when it was first founded. And we'll hear a little bit about that vision that the mayor had when he created that committee, and has enormous experience in this area. And he and I have had the chance to really promote this topic together for several years, which has been an honor for me. Second, in his second term, is Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Jaime Resendez, who also is a member of the Workforce Education and Equity Committee. So he has definitely cut his teeth not only in a previous term, but also as a member of the DISD school board, and will have comments for us about equity and education. And finally, the newest member of the council, Council Member Thomas Schultz, who is the current chair of Workforce Education and Equity Committee, and will have much to say about how she is joining this work. So I am going to open by pitching the first question to Councilmember Thomas. As the first chair of the Workforce Education and Equity Committee, can you tell us a little about the mayor's vision as he established that committee, and what you were able to do in its early years that has set us on the path that the city is on today with regard to moving equity forward for all? And I know that the Equity Indicators report was a big piece of that.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and good morning, and happy Equity Indicators Day. This is year 3, and as you stated, Sarah, we had the pleasure to be at Paul Quinn College. We served together on the lunch panel with our city manager, T.C. Broadnax, at the inaugural Equity Indicators Symposium. I want to thank Liz Sadia for her leadership, and everyone who's worked along with her, Dr. Lindsay Wilson, and that entire team that is working from an internal perspective to drive this work on racial equity. But not to belabor the point, approximately 5 years ago, it's hard to believe it's been 5 years, I went to our city manager, T.C. Broadnax, and said, we need a chief equity officer. And every budgeting period after that, I would ask him to say, tell him the same thing. We need a chief equity officer. Well, little did I know, our city manager was playing coy with me. Our city manager actually established the Office of Equity in Tacoma Washington, where he came from. I found that out from the current mayor, who was really heartbroken when we stole him away from Tacoma, Washington. We serve on the National League of Cities in leadership of the Real Council, Racial Equity and Leadership Council. She is now the president-elect for National League of Cities. And I was recently asked by our new president to serve as the co-chair for our National League of Cities Racial Equity and Leadership Council. And so I'm excited to now be able to lead and direct us from a national standpoint and have Dallas as a model. From our initial conversation, City Manager Broadnax allocated funding for our city budget, and we approved the budget with $1.25 million with staff of 4 individuals. As I spoke at the National League of Cities and bragged about what we were doing in Dallas, I found out that most offices, when they were established, they may have had 1 part-time staff person, less known 4 full-time staff people. And so that immediately skyrocketed the city of Dallas onto the map when we talk about racial equity. You mentioned the equity indicators. Yes, I had an opportunity to be chair of our previous committee, Human and Social Needs Committee, where we started the Office of Racial Equity. And under that committee, we established these equity indicators. And now we have a measuring tool that's available to help us to see how much progress we're making as relates to racial equity. Mayor Johnson, in his vision and establishment of the Workforce Education Equity Committee, really laid out a path from a council standpoint for us to put a focus on racial equity. We have seen, as a result of COVID, as a result of the social unrest that took place a year ago, we've seen a new energy and a renewed focus on addressing historic racial disparities. And the launching pad for that was the resolution on racial equity. We passed that under the previous council and then the council before that, because we wanted to send a message to our new 8 colleagues that racial equity was a priority, and they agreed to support that. And so now we're where we are now. We're excited. Next week, we start our town halls for our racial equity audit report of the comprehensive housing policy. And this summer, under the leadership of my mentee, who now chairs the Workforce Education Equity Committee, we expect to be in the process of adopting a citywide racial equity plan. So the city of Dallas is committed and focused on racial equity, and we want our business community, philanthropic community, faith-based community to walk in lockstep with us in this work.
Thank you, Councilmember Thomas. Now, Councilmember Schultz, you are the current chair of the Workforce Education and Equity Committee. Can you talk about what the committee has learned from the Equity Indicators report, and what was noteworthy, perhaps what was shocking? Sometimes the good news is the bad news. You know, if we can see what is wrong, then we can do something about it. And how have you been able to make use of that as you've taken over the committee? And then how you, as a new council person, have made use of that data to drive positive change?
Thank you. Well, it's a big question. It's a lot of really important conversation that we need to have together. But I want to start off, first of all, by saying that Vice Chair Thomas is absolutely holding my hand through this whole thing and helping me see how we can implement it. And I'm as committed as he is to making sure that we continue this effort and that we move forward. I think the staff that we have, Chief Liz Pereira and her team are amazing. Of course, Mayor Johnson gave me the privilege and the honor of leading this work for now. And I hope that I really make him proud of that decision. And then finally, of course, TC Broadnax and the entire city staff. That's a big part of what we're doing. We actually have begun to take the work of the entire committee and say, what are we doing internally as a city? And what are we also doing for the broader community? But one of my goals as the chair is to help the council through our committee become really fully cognizant of the importance and the impact of this report. This report is going to guide our work. It means not only bringing programs, but looking at the policies that the city currently has that needs to be changed. We have to help those who are in a position right now of advantage throughout our city understand that becoming a truly equitable city helps everyone. I like to remind people that equity is not pie, and that more for others doesn't mean less for you. It's going to move all of us forward, and that needs to sort of be the mantra for our city, is really understanding how important it is that this equity agenda is across the entire city. For example, through this report, we know that racially diverse neighborhoods have the highest number of business establishments, and that overall, those neighborhoods are the strongest and most resilient in the city. So therefore, as an example, we have to look at all of our programs and policies that move us toward that end of racially diverse neighborhoods. I have a couple of other examples that show why equity needs to matter to everyone. Eviction rates. Eviction rates in Black neighborhoods are 4 times that of white neighborhoods. And the impact on that is not just on those families who are tragically impacted by those evictions, but it also impacts all of our work that we're doing on homelessness and on education. Because when a family is evicted, their entire foundation is shaken up, and we can end up having impacts on, like I said, on our homelessness, on our education, the school district, all of it. And so we, as a city, need to embrace those inequitable eviction rates. Another example is because the state of Texas rejected the expansion of Medicaid, over 1 million Texans lost coverage. And that impacts jobs and our taxes, which affect everyone. So, for example, why is 37% of the Hispanic population uninsured compared to only 9% of the white population? What can we as a city do to help people get insured? That's an example of internal policies for the city, but also programs that we could partner with. We have so many amazing partners that we have. Internally, as a major employer, we are using this report to guide our own personnel policies and ensure that the city's workforce has equal access and growth opportunities as individuals. So those are just a taste of some of the many, many data points that we're using to impact our policies and our programs for the city.
Thank you, Councilmember Schultz. And last but not least is our Deputy Mayor Pro Tem, Jaime Resendez. Given your leadership experience with DISD, and you may want to share a little bit about that so people have that background, and as current member of the Workforce Education and Equity Committee, can you talk about the importance of building actual systems to establish sustainability and address disparities, and how those systems then are a part of advancing equity? And, you know, as a follow-up to really think through then your experience with that and the kind of progress over time that you've seen with the city of Dallas since the release of the Equity Indicators report, and potential ways of collaboration between ISDs and the city.
Right. So good morning, everyone. Thank you all for participating, for listening. So I served on the school board for close to 3 years, between 16 and towards the end of beginning of 19, I'm sorry. And during that time, I noticed how focused the Dallas ISD was on racial equity, you know, ensuring that the students that have that need the most attention get the resources that they need. And so from my perspective, I see equity and racial equity as a central tenet to my approach to governance. And so when I transitioned over to the city, I give a whole lot of credit to Vice Chairman Thomas. I've always thought that DISD was ahead of the city in terms of addressing equity. But when I started serving on the city council, I noticed how strongly Councilmember Thomas advocated for equity. And so I'm very appreciative and happy to see that. And a lot of our colleagues on the city council feel the same way, including Chairwoman Schultz. But in terms of sustainability that addresses disparities and advances equity, sustainability and policy go hand in hand when it comes to building systems to close disparities. For example, at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, I was appointed to serve on the ad hoc committee on COVID-19 recovery and assistance. And since I have experience on the school board, I was tasked to focus on education and seeing how the city can help address the inequities, the challenges that were presented in the education space. And so I made it a priority for the city to work on addressing the digital divide as part of our emergency response efforts, knowing that our students need access to the internet to participate in virtual schooling, and our residents need access to telehealth and employment resources. So this resulted in a year-long process to develop the City of Dallas Broadband and Digital Equity Strategic Plan. This plan recommends leveraging federal dollars and establishing cross-sector partnerships to implement long-term solutions and build out the city's fiber infrastructure so that all Dallas residents have access to the internet, especially in areas where internet service gaps exist, like the area that I represent, Southeast Dallas District 5. So right now we're in a unique moment in history in which a large influx of federal dollars is being allocated to municipalities across the nation. And so the city of Dallas is investing $43 million in closing the digital divide with an eye towards permanently closing disparities that have long existed in our city. So I know that my colleagues on the council are determined to continue embedding equity across city policies to advance systemic change and address historical disinvestments and inequities. With regard to the progress that I've seen from the city since the release of the 2019 Equity Indicators Report, and potential ways for collaboration between ISDs and the city. So the city council, from my perspective, is determined to implement and advance our strategic plans, strategies and reports rather than having them sit on a shelf. The Equity Indicators Report is particularly important as a resource for data disaggregated by race, ethnicity, and where applicable, gender. In 2020, the city of Dallas and the organization Every Texan updated the Equity Indicators Report to focus on economic opportunity and specific disparities in our communities that have been exacerbated as a result of the pandemic. So we're sharing these findings publicly so that communities can hold the city accountable for its efforts to improve outcomes for all residents. The city of Dallas is committed to increasing transparency through regular analysis and publication of these findings, providing a clear view into disparities in our community and how they change over time. And obviously we can't move forward without partnerships with other various entities, but more specifically in terms of what I've seen from the city, last year, for example, the city council voted to send to the voters the opportunity to allow non-citizens to serve on certain boards, on all boards and commissions. So I was proud of the council for voting for that. Unfortunately, the voters in the city didn't approve that measure. Another example is the city is moving forward in addressing fine and fee justice. Also looking at non-law enforcement related tools to combat crime and try to address the root causes of crime, like poverty. And among other things like related to budget, procurement, and personnel decisions. So there are ways for the city and Dallas ISD to try to partner. And I think specifically looking at the bond dollars that are available, if we can find ways to leverage those bond dollars to address the issues that we're discussing today, internet access and those types of things. But I'm looking forward to continuing this work with my colleagues and everyone who is listening and everyone who's participating today.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Thomas, I'm going to turn to you next because you have been quoted as saying that when we talk about racial equity, that embedded in that is the development of policies, practices, and investment in community to address racial disparities and to dismantle institutional racism. Tell us a little bit about the role of the racial equity plan in that and some of the audits that you have called for. What needs to take place to keep the work of equity at the forefront of policy decisions?
Excellent question. I knew you would come with a whammy. So thank you for that. I was chair, and it preceded Chair Schultz even being on the council. I was chair of the Workforce Education Equity Committee when I requested the citywide racial equity plan. I'm glad that she's here now to partner with me as we move this forward. And you're gonna hear, I saw the runner show, you're gonna hear from her who is the consultant with Prospero, who is leading that effort and is doing a tremendous job with that at this point. As we began to look at Dallas and what the impact of COVID-19, the pandemic, has been, truth of the matter, when things were quote unquote normal, people were not doing well who lived in communities of color at that time. So we have an opportunity to hit the reset button in many, many ways. And so our first step is our citywide racial equity plan. I want to emphasize this. Me and Chair Schultz talked about this, so I said I would do it. The racial equity audit of the comprehensive housing policy is one piece of the citywide plan. I know it's gotten a lot of attention. The next week we'll do our town hall meetings and people will it'll be getting a lot more attention. But I want to put this in context and understand and make sure everyone understands that's just one component of the citywide racial equity plan, which is going to look at internal, external, and has began that process. And so this work is extremely important, and it's only a beginning. I have 18 months left. This work will continue once I'm no longer on the council. However, my two colleagues here, I trust them. I will share with them as much as I can to get them up to speed to where they can continue this work long term. What we have to do is we have to make sure that we institutionalize the work of racial equity. And we've got to begin normalizing racial equity in the community. So we need a commitment from our faith-based community, our nonprofit, our business community has to be committed. And the key word is intentional. We have to be intentional about this work on racial equity. We're talking about changing the dynamic of the city of Dallas from the past 40, 50 years in an equitable manner going forward. Something that's a guide for me is a book called The Color of Law. I recommend anyone who's interested or serious about doing this work on racial equity, get a copy of that book because it shows how across the country and in the city of Dallas, we institutionalize racist policies. And if we did it institutionally, we could undo it institutionally as well. And that's why I'm committed to this work.
Okay, here are two big questions for all of you to be considering. I'm going to pass it to you first, Council Member Schultz. So just so you're ready. There are two questions I think that are really important given that most of the people on this call are residents and constituents, and if not of the city of Dallas, they are of neighboring cities. What role do constituents need to play in the ongoing work of the racial equity plan and overall as we march toward greater equity across our region? And what is your call to action for those on this call?
Well, thank you. It's a really interesting question because our city is so diverse that everyone's going to come at this from a different lens. And so I think that our job is in partnering with our constituencies to understand the lens through which each of them are coming and see how we can work together to help them understand. And as Vice Chair Thomas said, really embrace this and integrate this into the city's ethos so that it becomes who we are as a city. We actually become that city that says, I'm going to look at what I have and what I need. And I'm also going to be cognizant and supportive of what someone else has and what they need. And what that means is that we're going to have to do some painful work. As this audit shows, I mean, the history and the historical policies that have brought us to this point, it's really shocking and surprising. It was for me to be awakened this way. And I think that the Every Texan report helped so much because it's just like point by point by point, the United Way report, there's so many other, the business case for racial equity on every level. There have been so many excellent reports, and maybe we can put a list of them. I know that on the new We Are One website, it has a tremendous number of those resources, and I hope that everybody will go to those and read those reports, because once you read those reports, you can't not look away. And not only that, in working with our constituents, what it means is whether it be a zoning case or whether it be working with the DART to change the bus lines, whatever it is, we have to look at this from a racial, and I hope down the road, gender equity issue, that we're going to bring it forward. So it becomes like, just like we've done with the budget now. I don't know if that's been said before, but our budget now is done through an equity lens, which is amazing. And now that Cospiro has done the first of the audits of our existing and active plans, I want to go through every one of our plans and do that same kind of audit to say, where did we miss the boat on equity and how do we bring that forward? So it just becomes, what's great about it is for constituents as well as for staff and council, we have a champion for different things like Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Resendez on digital divide. We need champions for big ticket items like the digital divide, like housing. Those are big buckets that are going to take one person that's going to be relentless to get it through. So what we have to do is sort of check every time on everything that we do and say, did we use that lens? Did we use that lens? Because historically, and we don't have the muscle memory to be doing that. We've always done it on economic prosperity. Check. Does it make the city money? Right? We need to ask that same question, check, are we moving toward equity on this? Because that's going to move all of us forward in every way. So I hope that answered your question. And if not, I'm happy to answer other questions later. Thank you.
Well, we also have a question in the chat box about how the city is defining equity. Does one of you want to take that before we continue with the question about constituents?
So right now we are focused on a racial lens, but we are moving more and more toward gender. The mayor just initiated in his past council to do a disabilities commission. We definitely have the CCAP. So we have these other lenses, but at this point, the full equity is based on race. And please, my colleagues, correct me or staff if I misstated that.
Okay, Councilmember Resendez, what constituents, what can constituents be doing in this ongoing work, and what your call to action for those on this call?
I think the key word from a constituent perspective would be accountability, holding current elected officials accountable and city staff accountable for this type of work. One of the things that I was most proud of during my time on the school board is that I felt that the board members that I served with understood the importance of equity, regardless of the part of the city and the county that they represented. The board members consistently voted to ask for additional resources and allocate those resources in areas of high need. When we think about the tax ratification election, when we think about historic bond that was passed. And so I was extremely proud to serve with those types of individuals. So thinking about the council, I think it's important for constituents to hold all of us accountable. You know, the folks that represent Southern Dallas, the folks that represent Northern Dallas, and it's important for the message of equity versus equality to continue, because I quickly realized when I was on the school board that the ability for students to learn is impacted by the opportunities and resources to which they are exposed outside of the classroom. So policies related to housing, economic development, criminal justice, transportation, all of these issues impact the ability of people to reach their full potential. And those are the reasons why I decided to run for city council. And so it's important for constituents, the people that are listening, to continue the message about equity being about access to opportunity. And as Chairwoman Schultz said, what's good for one part of Dallas benefits the entire city.
Councilmember Thomas, what role do constituents need to play in this ongoing work, and what is your call to action for those on the call today?
You know, sometimes pictures worth 1,000 words. Roll the sleeves up. We need everyone to get involved in this effort. We see across the country, there's a huge backlash against work of racial equity. We need people who don't look like me. And I'm glad Sheriff Schultz is chair of this committee and can be the face at this as we move forward in this effort, because we need people who look like her, who are willing to say the same things that she's saying in their own neighborhoods, in their own churches, in their own synagogues. We've got to get our white colleagues and constituents to come on board, do the hard work of really understanding how this work benefits all of us. Oftentimes, when these discussions are held, it appears that there's a black grievance, a white guilt. And I said this, I believe, at that luncheon. We've got to get past black anger and white guilt. Once we can get past that, we can really come together and we begin to look at things from each other's point of view and really move the city forward. If Dallas is going to be one Dallas, it's got to be an equitable city. And we are rolling our sleeves up to do the work. And I challenge and invite and encourage everyone to join us in this work.
Okay, one final question for each of you, and then also feel free to add in any closing remarks that you have in the last 5 minutes we have together. As we're ending today's roundtable discussion, as policymakers, what is one key takeaway that our audience should understand about equity being embedded into policy? And I will begin with you, Councilmember Sendez.
I think it's about understanding the importance of equity versus equality. Equity is about addressing areas of highest need and directing those resources that way. That's how I've approached governance. I was on the school board, so I plan on continuing to do here on the city council, and I continue to preach it to community members and to my colleagues. And so I'm really encouraged about the discussion that we're having today, and I'm encouraged by the conversations that I've had with colleagues and staff members since I've been on the city council. So I think that's my biggest takeaway.
Councilmember Thomas.
I think, I'm gonna say it again, the key word is intentional. We've got to be intentional about doing this work. It's easy to fall into, what's comfortable or how things have always been, a status quo, but there are a lot of efforts that are going on right here in the city of Dallas. And I like how Chair Schultz began to pull some of the data from the equity indicators. One around employment. Post-COVID, African-American employment has decreased tremendously. There's an initiative that's coming to Dallas, 110. And 110 is focused on hiring 1 million Black blue-collar employees to jobs that don't require 4-year degrees over the next 10 years. That's 110, or website is 110.org. And Dallas is the first city. They just did an event live on 97.5 about this initiative. It was a phenomenal discussion. So we've got to be intentional. And then the business argument. When I came across that, I think I shared it with every council member that I knew that is serious and focused on this work. When we see the business argument for racial equity, how much money we're leaving on the table, even the most conservative individual will recognize if we're going to move this city forward, then we've got to embrace, not just accept, not tolerate. We've got to fully embrace racial equity, and we will see the benefits tremendously from that. The last thing I want to say, and I put it in the chat, please, on a regular basis, because we're going to make sure it's updated on a regular basis, weareonedallas.org. Go to that webpage if you want to follow what's being done around racial equity and our citywide racial equity plan here in Dallas. Thank you for being a part of this. It has grown tremendously. It's phenomenal to see the baby grow up, and now it's starting to take steps, and soon it'll be running. And Dallas will be a model for the entire country for racial equity. Thank you.
Amen to that. May it be so. And Chair Schultz.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you for guiding us through a really, really interesting conversation. I, of course, agree with everything that my colleagues said, and I just want to add to that. Using the data is really, I think, the key for us to be able to measure our success and be held accountable to this. And so I want this report, the full report, not just the update, to be something that's common tongue throughout Dallas. Just as an example, in terms of moving that needle, we'll be able to see when one of my favorite examples is when the African American and Latino population earn the same kind of living wage as the white population, there'll be $115 billion added to our local GDP. That's everyone's benefit. And so we have to be able to use those data points, whether it's health or safety or economic growth or housing, all of those issues. We need to use that data, continue to use that data, and hold us accountable to those data points. Are we moving the needle? If we're not, we have to understand why, and that's where those audits come in. So we have a system in place that's really going to be able to move us forward on this. So I'm very excited about this work, and I'm just thrilled and honored to be able to be a part of it in a leadership way. So thank you very much.
Well, we will close this panel with some of the best words that there are, and those are, again, from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. 2 quotes. One, it was him extolling all of us to make a career of humanity. Commit yourself to the noble struggle for equal rights. You will make a better person of yourself, a greater nation of your country, and a finer world to live in. That certainly is what we're going for. And then also I will convert his I to we and say, yes, if you want to say that we were drum majors, say that we were drum majors for justice, say that we were drum majors for peace, say that we were drum majors for righteousness, and all the other shallow things will not matter. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and go with some fire in your belly to join us in this fight.